They deleted my name from every gallery plaque, every press release, every blueprint I ever touched. So I smiled, stepped back, and bought the land beneath their flagship building. I didn't raise my voice. I raised their rent. They hosted galas in rooms I owned, posed for photos under lights I installed, and when the headlines finally asked who built it all, I didn't need to answer. Because by then, my silence had already signed every wall. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The papers arrived on a Thursday morning, the kind of humid Savannah morning when the air feels like it's been holding its breath. The courier stood on Clarice's porch with a polite expression and sweat darkening his collar. He didn't need to say anything, just the thick white envelope, stamped Final Decree of Dissolution, said it all. Clarice signed for it with the same composure she'd used when she arranged floral centerpieces for fundraisers, deliberate, elegant, emotionless on the surface. Inside, though, a quiet war began, years of marriage reduced to property lists and signatures that no longer carried her name. Her reflection caught in the entryway mirror, pearl earrings, pressed linen blouse, hair pinned like armor. She whispered to herself, "Grace is the only revenge they'll never expect." She set the envelope on the console table, beside a crystal vase she once chose for the Langley dining room. Trent had called it too sentimental. Now it was just hers. Her phone buzzed. A notification. Aubrey Langley tagged her in a post she couldn't see anymore. A public account, of course. Curiosity won. Clarice clicked through. Aubrey, draped in cream silk and arrogance, smiling between Trent and Skylar, the caption reading, "New beginnings, the kind of family legacy Hark Langley design." Clarice stared at the image until her tea went cold. New beginnings. They'd always been obsessed with appearances. Gallery openings, fundraisers, glossy covers that showed perfection framed by deceit. What the photo didn't show was the woman who'd built those rooms, who'd chosen every hue and line and texture they now claimed as theirs. She shut off her phone and opened the envelope. The decree was clean, clinical. Line after line stripped her from everything she'd touched. Langley Estates, reassigned. Langley Design, ownership transferred. And in a final insult, name usage rights for legacy branding to remain with Trent Langley and Associates. Clarice let out a sound she didn't recognize. Not quite laughter, not quite grief. Something in between, the kind of sound that happens right before steel hardens. That afternoon, she dressed deliberately. Cream slacks, navy jacket, the faint scent of gardenia perfume that used to drive Trent crazy. She walked through downtown Savannah toward the gallery they'd co-founded, the one whose sign no longer bore her name. Through the window, she saw Skylar, impossibly polished, all gloss and camera-ready smiles, giving instructions to an event planner. The Langley Rebrand Gala, according to the banner. Her replacement's voice floated through the open doorway. "Let's make it feel timeless but modern. The old era's finally over." Clarice stepped back into the sunlight, calm as glass. The old era wasn't over. It was merely being redesigned. A journalist she vaguely recognized from the Savannah Ledger spotted her near the corner. "Mrs. Langley, sorry, Ms. Langley, how does it feel to move on from the past?" Clarice turned to him slowly. Her lipstick caught the light like a blade. "The past," she said evenly, "has better lawyers than you know." The reporter blinked, half smiling as if unsure whether he'd just been threatened or charmed. She didn't clarify, let him wonder. By sunset, she was back home, the envelope now open and pinned to a corkboard above her desk. Next to it, a note in her looping handwriting. Phase 1. Structure. A knock sounded at her door. When she opened it, Janine Masters stood there, windblown and carrying a leather portfolio thick with documents. Her expression was a mixture of triumph and concern. "I thought you'd need a friend," Janine said, brushing past her like she still owned the place. She set the folder on the table, its tab labeled in neat type. Structuring. Phase 1. Clarice poured 2 glasses of white wine and asked, "You brought the blueprints?" Janine smiled. "I brought the skeleton key." Clarice's gaze fell to the folder. Inside lay deeds, shell companies, the faint outlines of something powerful forming in silence. Outside, cicadas began their evening chorus. Inside, Clarice lifted her glass, the faintest smirk playing on her lips. "To new beginnings," Janine said. Clarice clinked her glass but didn't drink. Her eyes were fixed on the folder. "Not new," she murmured. "Restored." The corkboard trembled slightly under the ceiling fan, the decree fluttering like a flag over a quiet battlefield. And beneath it, a blank sheet of paper waited, ready for her first move. The next morning began with silence, the kind that hums beneath Savannah's polished charm. Clarice sat at her desk, the remnants of last night's wine tracing pale rings on a stack of documents Janine had left behind. The sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, slicing her reflection into fragments across the glass tabletop. She reached for the top document, a copy of her divorce settlement. The pages felt heavy, as though soaked in invisible ink only she could read. Somewhere inside this pile was the hinge, something small, overlooked, something Trent's lawyers hadn't valued enough to bury. Her eyes caught it on the 4th page. Langley and Hart Interiors, LLC, a ghost company assigned to her name, valued at negligible, a courtesy asset, what they must have called it in their closed-door laughter. But Clarice's pulse shifted when she saw the fine print. The LLC held 12% of leasing rights in several commercial art properties under Langley Design Holdings. 12% wasn't a scrap, it was a lever. Janine walked in without knocking, carrying a black coffee and the morning paper. "You look like a woman about to ruin someone's week," she said, setting both down. Clarice tapped the LLC line with her fingernail. "Trent thought this was decorative. Turns out, it's structural." Janine leaned in, scanning the page. Then she smiled, the slow, satisfied smile of an attorney who smelled blood in the water. "You've still got a bored voice." Clarice shook her head, calm and deliberate. "No, I don't want to speak in their room anymore. I want to echo in it." Janine raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking of a proxy?" "Someone they'd never see coming," Clarice said. Her gaze drifted toward the newspaper's art section, an article headlined "Savannah's New Minimalist Wave. Miles Booker's Vision Redefines Southern Modern." Janine followed her eyes and chuckled. He always did worship your taste. Miles Booker. Once her apprentice, restless, talented, loyal to a fault. He'd left Langley Design 5 years ago after Trent dismissed him for being too idealistic. Now, he was thriving. Clarice traced the photo in the article. Miles, standing in front of a steel and glass studio, confidence in every line of his posture. "Call him," Janine said. "He owes you." Clarice smiled faintly. "He doesn't owe me, but he'll understand." By afternoon, she was walking through the open doors of Booker's studio, where paint, scent, and ambition mingled with the faint hum of jazz. Miles emerged from behind a half-finished sculpture, taller than she remembered, his sleeves rolled to the elbows. "Clarice Langley," he said, grin wide, voice warm, or should I say, Clarice, survivor of Savannah Society. She returned the smile, but her eyes carried something steelier. "I prefer Architect of Aftermath." He laughed softly. "You've still got it." "I never lost it," she said. He gestured toward the studio's back room. "Come on, let's talk somewhere the interns won't eavesdrop." The room was quiet, lined with canvases and design drafts. Clarice spread the papers across a long wooden table. The LLC, The lease documents, the numbers that glinted like uncut gems. Miles leaned closer, eyebrows lifting as realization dawned. "They don't know you still own this?" he asked. "They never read what they signed," she said. "They just assumed I'd be too sentimental to notice." He chuckled. That was their first mistake. Janine's voice echoed in Clarice's memory. "Want to activate your bored voice?" Clarice's response now came out clear, measured. "I don't want to activate it. I want to amplify it. Through someone else." Miles leaned back, studying her with that old mixture of admiration and awe. "Let me guess. You want me to speak for you. Publicly, quietly, strategically." "I want you to grow," Clarice said. "And in the process, I want them to choke on their own underestimations." He exhaled slowly. "You back my studio, I'll host the receipts." Clarice looked around at the half-finished art, the young assistants painting the edges of their ambitions in the next room. The space buzzed with creation, renewal, hunger. Exactly what she'd been denied. Her fingers rested on the LLC document one last time. "Done," she said. Miles nodded. "Then I'll make the first move. You just tell me when to hang the frame." That night, back at her house, Clarice poured herself another glass of wine and watched the lights of downtown Savannah flicker in the distance. She pinned a new note beneath Phase 1 on her corkboard: "Booker proxy activated." The ceiling fan stirred the air, whispering against the paper like applause. Clarice leaned back, eyes narrowing in quiet satisfaction. Somewhere in Langley HQ, Trent was probably celebrating his week's victory, completely unaware that the smallest line item in their divorce papers had just come alive beneath his feet. She lifted her glass toward the window, toasting the night itself. "To the company they thought I left," she whispered. Outside, thunder rolled low across the Savannah River, like a door unlocking in the dark. Savannah glimmered in early spring, humidity just beginning to rise from the cobblestones. Clarice sat on her veranda, reading the Savannah Chronicle with surgical calm. The headline caught her attention before the coffee even cooled. "Langley Design unveils plans for the Whitaker House restoration. A triumph in heritage modernization." Trent's face filled the page, smiling, polished, perfectly lit. Skylar stood beside him in a white silk dress, one hand on his arm like a signature flourish. The old Langley charm, reheated for the press. Clarice's eyes slid down to the subtext. "Langley Design Holdings announces new headquarters and art gallery space in the restored Whitaker Building, downtown Savannah." She folded the paper slowly, her fingers tracing the image. The Whitaker Building. She knew that address intimately, had designed its interiors herself, decades ago, before Trent made it a showpiece for his empire. What he clearly didn't realize, what his glossy PR team had failed to check, was that the land beneath it wasn't Langley's. It was held under Savannah Heritage Trust LLC, her trust. The same shell Janine had set up for her 20 years ago to shield assets during expansion, and it was still hers, quietly, legally, completely. Janine's voice broke the silence from the porch doorway. "Please tell me that look means what I think it means." Clarice turned the paper toward her. "He's moved into my foundation, literally." Janine chuckled, setting her briefcase on the wicker chair. "How poetic." Clarice's gaze never left the photograph. "Poetry is for people who can afford sentiment. I prefer accounting." By noon, they were in Janine's office, cool air, sharp light, and rows of leather-bound property files. Janine flipped through her archive with the precision of a surgeon. Here it is: Whitaker land lease, 20-year term, renewable, adjustable under clause 47. "Rent escalation clause?" Clarice asked. "Up to 30%, if redevelopment occurs without notice to the lessor." A pause stretched between them. Then, identical smiles. "Prepare the adjustment," Clarice said. Quietly? Always. The soft opening was a spectacle of glass and ego. Clarice arrived in a black sheath dress that whispered sophistication without apology. The Whitaker building glowed from within, crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, influencers posing beneath brass signage that read, Langley House. She moved through the crowd unseen, every step measured, every glance absorbed into the music and laughter. Skylar across the room sparkled in sequins and nerves. Trent stood beside her, wine in hand, his laughter just a shade too loud. Clarice didn't need to speak. She let the building do it for her. She could feel the bones of it under her heels, the marble she'd chosen, the molding she'd sketched on tracing paper while Trent had been too busy signing checks to notice. This place had always been hers. Clarice Langley? A young woman asked shyly, approaching her near the back gallery. I just wanted to say, I studied your work in design school. You taught us that proportion is memory. Clarice blinked. She hadn't heard that quote in years. Thank you, she said softly. Proportion is truth too. Don't forget that. From across the room, Skylar caught sight of her. A brief flash of recognition, then dismissal. A perfectly trained smile. She turned back to the photographers, laughing, hand on Trent's chest. Clarice turned, slow and deliberate, and left the building without another word. By midnight, the rent adjustment documents were drafted, notarized, and filed, an invisible shift beneath Langley Design's gleaming new showcase. Janine texted her a single line. Executed. They'll get the notice Monday. Clarice didn't reply. She was watching the social feeds light up instead. Sri Langley, Rebirth, Sheen, Heritage, Meets, Modern. But nestled among them, another tag had begun to surface. Return to Elegance. She clicked it. Dozens of photos from Miles's new collection. Steel, linen, silence, grace. Every piece unmistakably hers in spirit. The press had already begun calling it a return to elegant minimalism. Clarice smiled. The timing was perfect. Trent's empire was celebrating itself on borrowed land, while a ghost from its past was reclaiming the city's eye. She took a slow sip of wine, the Savannah night humming beyond her window. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Janine. You should see this. Trent just called our old accountant, wants to know who the hell Savannah Heritage Trust is. Clarice's reply was immediate. Tell him it's someone who designs rooms from the foundation up. She set down her phone and stared out at the dark silhouette of the Whitaker building in the distance. Its lights shimmered against the river, beautiful and oblivious. And under all that beauty, it had already started paying her rent. The Langley Gala was meant to crown a new era. Every glossy invitation whispered exclusivity. Every photograph promised legacy reborn. The entire Savannah design scene buzzed about it. Skylar's debut as co-curator, Trent's celebration of modern heritage. It was the kind of event Clarice used to plan, right down to the candlelight reflection on the marble. She almost didn't go. Almost. But curiosity has its own gravity. By the time she arrived, the night had bloomed into champagne laughter and camera flashes. Clarice moved through the entrance quietly, like a memory refusing to fade. Heads turned, polite nods flickered, but no one stopped her. That was the beauty of erasure. They'd already convinced themselves she didn't belong here. The gallery shimmered under chandeliers she had once selected. The air smelled faintly of citrus oil and ambition. Then she saw it, across the main hall, bathed in golden light. Her breath caught. It was Evensong, a large-scale painting she'd commissioned from a Charleston artist 30 years ago, a piece that hung for decades above the Langley dining room, a portrait of shadowed magnolias, painted over a subtle architectural sketch of the original Langley home. She'd chosen it as a metaphor, memory layered over foundation. Trent had once said, "It's too personal for the public eye." Yet here it was, centerpiece of their gala, displayed with a plaque that read, "Private Collection of Trent and Schuyler Langley." Clarice walked closer. The gallery lights hummed. Beneath the brass frame, the artist's signature still shone in neat ink. But below that, in faded cursive, the original ownership inscription, "Property of Clarice Hart Langley." Her hand brushed the air near the corner of the frame, never touching it. The security guard glanced her way, uncertain. She smiled, soft as sugar, and turned to leave. Janine was waiting at her home office when she arrived. She didn't ask what Clarice had seen. She already knew. The photo of Evensong had hit the social feeds hours earlier. Janine opened her laptop and said, "Certificate of Provenance?" Clarice handed her a folder, meticulously organized. Signed and recorded in 1996. Title never transferred. It was gifted for use, not ownership. Janine's eyes gleamed. "Then it's still yours." "Legally," Clarice said, taking a slow sip of tea. "Morally, it always was." Within the hour, Janine had drafted the cease and desist letter addressed to Langley Design Holdings. It was crisp, devastating, and lethal in its politeness. At midnight, it hit the inboxes of the gallery's legal department, the event sponsors, and, through a quiet leak, the Savannah Chronicle's arts editor. By morning, the online storm had begun. Aubrey's post was the first shot fired. "Bullies shouldn't get to rewrite beauty. Some people can't stand not being the center of the picture. Let art live, Langley legacy." The comments poured in, half sympathy, half gossip. Clarice watched from her veranda, robe tied neatly, the morning sunlight gilding her coffee cup. She smirked, murmuring to no one in particular, "Let them chase pretty. I'll stay with legal." Janine called minutes later, her tone bright. "They've already taken the post down." "Good," Clarice said, "but leave the rumor alive." Across town, Miles's studio opened its doors for a weekend exhibit. The crowd buzzed about his refined architectural compositions. His assistants adjusted placards, angled spotlights, and brewed espresso for guests who spoke in curated excitement. At the back of the gallery, a single new label gleamed under the track lighting, "Collection courtesy of CL." The initials weren't explained. They didn't need to be. The art critics would do the guessing for her. One of the younger curators whispered, "Do you think it's her?" Miles only smiled. "She's everywhere. You just have to know where to look." That night, Clarice poured herself a glass of Cabernet and opened her laptop. A flood of messages blinked in her inbox. Journalists, collectors, old acquaintances suddenly remembering her existence. She ignored them all and opened a single file Janine had sent, the finalized acknowledgement from the Langley event's organizers. They'd agreed to remove Evensong from public display, pending review of ownership. Clarice stared at the document, her reflection faint in the screen's glow. Then she shut the laptop and stood, walking to her corkboard. A new note slid under Phase 1, structure. Phase 2, retrieval. Outside, the rain began, steady, deliberate, like the sound of papers signing themselves in her favor. Her phone buzzed. A message from Miles. "They've started asking about the initials. Want me to tell them?" Clarice typed back, "No. Let them wonder whose frame they're standing in." She set the phone down, smiling as thunder cracked over the Savannah skyline. Savannah's morning light slid across the city like a slow blade, gilding rooftops, awakening church bells, and glinting off the mirrored facade of the Whitaker building. Inside, Langley Design buzzed with the kind of self-importance that only comes before a fall. At 9:02 a.m., an email landed in their inboxes. Subject: Notice of lease escalation, Savannah Heritage Trust, lessor. By 9:04, the boardroom went quiet. Trent Langley stood at the head of the table holding the letter with trembling fingers. His jaw flexed as he reread the words. each line a legal dagger dressed in politeness. Effective immediately, rental obligations for the Whitaker property would double for the next 5 years. The escalation clause had been triggered due to unauthorized redevelopment without lesser consultation. He slammed the folder shut. "Get me Walters." His assistant, pale and flustered, said, "He's on his way up." Trent paced to the window overlooking the river, the same view Clarice once insisted they design around. The irony burned. "Who the hell even owns this trust?" he muttered. The door opened. His lawyer, Walters, sweating already, entered with a folder of his own. "I've reviewed the lease, sir. It's airtight." "Airtight for who?" Walters hesitated. "For the lesser." Trent's voice rose. "Then find me the damn name behind Savannah Heritage Trust." Walters flipped to the final page and went still. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Trent snatched the paper. There, in neat type, "Savannah Heritage Trust, authorized agent, Janine E. Masters, Esquire." The color drained from his face. Across town, Janine and Clarice sat in a quiet corner of an old law library, the air smelling faintly of dust and vengeance. A copy of the same lease lay between them, spread like a chessboard. Janine tapped the clause with her pen. "Executed, recorded, and enforceable. They have 60 days to comply or vacate." Clarice's smile was subtle, but dangerous. "They won't vacate. Trent's too proud to move. He'll pay it." Janine leaned back. "You're betting on ego." "I'm betting on habit," Clarice replied. "He's built an empire out of pretending everything's fine." Her eyes caught the morning sun spilling across the aged paper. The signature at the bottom, Trent's lawyer, Walters, still looked smug in its ink. "You were in such a hurry to push me out," she whispered to the absent man. "You never checked the fine print." By late afternoon, the fallout had begun to ripple. A leaked memo hit the design circles before lunch. Langley HQ faces, sudden rent, doubling amid legal complications. Schuyler tried to spin it with a post about temporary financial restructuring. Aubrey, predictably, went silent for 6 hours before resurfacing with a tone-deaf video tour of her new home office. Clarice watched it all unfold from her terrace, the wind teasing the edges of her silk scarf. Below, the azaleas swayed, oblivious to the tremor shaking the city's design elite. Her phone buzzed, a message from Janine. "They're trying to fight it. Trent's demanding a meeting." Clarice typed back, "Let him. I prefer face-to-face architecture." The confrontation happened at the Whitaker boardroom, gleaming marble, tense air, and the faint echo of a kingdom cracking. Trent looked older than she remembered. Not by years, but by consequence. Schuyler sat beside him, posture defensive, eyes darting toward every witness in the room. Clarice entered without ceremony. She wore charcoal gray, her hair pinned, her expression unbothered. Janine followed, carrying a slim folder, the same one that had rewritten their reality. "Clarice," Trent started, attempting charm. "Surely this is some mistake. You can't seriously—" Janine interrupted smoothly. "The lease is valid. The clause was triggered by redevelopment without lesser consent, and the lesser, as of record, is Mrs. Clarice Langley. Well, technically, Ms. Langley now." Trent blinked. What the hell?" Clarice met his gaze evenly. "You built your monument on my land, Trent. I didn't take anything from you. You just forgot to look down." Schuyler leaned forward, sharp and brittle. "You're really going to bleed us for money you don't need?" Clarice's lips curved. "It's not about the money. It's about reminding you whose foundation you're standing on." The silence that followed was surgical. Trent's fist came down hard on the table. "This isn't over." Clarice gathered her papers, calm as ever. "It never is, with you." She nodded to Janine. "Send them a payment schedule." As they left the room, Schuyler's voice followed, brittle with panic. Trent, the charity gala's next month. We can't cancel it, Trent snapped. Clarice paused in the doorway, just long enough for her heels to echo through the marble. Outside, the late sun washed the building in gold. For the first time, it looked less like a legacy and more like a liability. She turned to Janine, voice low, controlled. That was the first one. There are others. Janine smiled faintly. Then I hope he's learned to read the fine print. Clarice looked up at the Langley sign gleaming against the sky, and the corner of her mouth lifted. The invitation arrived wrapped in blush-pink stationery and passive aggression. Let's reset, for appearances. Signed, Skylar Langley. Clarice almost laughed. A brunch invitation from the woman who'd once tried to erase her existence. How civilized. Still, there was something delicious about walking into enemy territory on her own terms, so she accepted, if only to see what Skylar thought she could win. The following Sunday, Clarice stepped through the wrought iron gates of the Forsyth Garden Club, a place she hadn't visited since before the divorce. The azaleas were in full bloom, pink, brazen, and unbothered by scandal. Skylar was already seated on the patio, rosé glass half full, wearing oversized sunglasses that screamed curated nonchalance. "Clarice!" she sang out, her voice dipped in honey and nerves. "You look stunning. I wasn't sure you'd come." Clarice slipped into the chair opposite her. Curiosity gets the better of everyone, eventually. A waiter appeared, all smiles and silver trays. Skylar ordered avocado toast and another bottle of rosé. Clarice asked for coffee. Black, no sugar. For a moment, they sat in silence, a tableau of civility framed by white linen and distant laughter. Skylar finally broke it with a practiced sigh. "I just thought, maybe we could put the tension behind us. It's exhausting for everyone." Clarice raised an eyebrow. "Tension implies two sides pulling. I've only been standing still." Skylar's smile wavered. "You know what I mean. Trent's temper isn't easy. And Aubrey, well, she takes everything personally. The city watches us, Clarice. It wouldn't hurt to show we can coexist." Clarice leaned back, studying her carefully. Skylar's perfume was too sweet, her ring too large, her confidence too brittle. "Appearances matter to you?" Clarice said softly. "Almost as much as pretending control?" Skylar laughed, light and forced. "Oh, you're still sharp. That's what I admire about you." She sipped her wine, then added, almost offhand, "You'll be happy to know Trent's finally diversifying. We're closing a licensing deal for the Langley home line, reviving some of your old design concepts. Isn't that poetic?" The words hung between them, gilded and careless. Clarice didn't move, didn't blink, but the air around her changed. "My old designs?" she said, tone mild, curious. Skylar nodded enthusiastically. "Those sketches from the early years, clean, classic, timeless. We're rebranding them for mass retail. Trent says they still carry your essence." Clarice's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. How generous of him. Skylar didn't catch the edge in her tone. "We'll give you credit, of course. Symbolically. It's really about legacy more than ownership." Clarice reached for her coffee, stirring it once before meeting Skylar's eyes. "Legacy isn't symbolic, dear. It's contractual." For a flicker of a second, Skylar's expression faltered. Then she recovered, flipping her hair and laughing. "You always had such a way with words." Clarice's phone buzzed on the table. A message from Janine. "Langley home, trademark filed today. Designs match your 2002 portfolio. Guess who still holds the copyright?" Clarice's thumb hovered over the screen, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. She slid the phone face down and looked back at Skylar. "Tell me, do you believe in ghosts?" Skylar blinked, thrown. "Excuse me?" "Because sometimes," Clarice said lightly, The past haunts a project before it's even built. The waiter returned with another round of rosé. Skylar raised her glass. To power women only, she said, her tone chirpy again, as if the conversation hadn't turned to glass and daggers. Clarice lifted her coffee cup in silent toast, letting the steam rise between them like smoke. By the time she returned home, Janine was waiting on her porch with 2 folders and an amused smirk. "That woman really is predictable," she said. Clarice took the folders, flipping one open to reveal Skylar's licensing documents, the company's eager signatures already in place. "Predictability is a design flaw," Clarice murmured. Janine chuckled. "Do you want me to send the notice or let them announce the deal first?" Clarice closed the folder slowly. "Let them celebrate. I like to time my corrections for the applause." She moved to her desk, adding a note beneath Phase 2, retrieval. Phase 3, reclamation. Outside, the evening light softened to amber, the same hue as the rosé Skylar had so proudly poured. Her phone pinged again, an image notification. Skylar's new post. A brunch table, pink drinks, manicured hands, captioned, "Power Women Only. Capture New Beginnings. Saw Langley Legacy." Clarice stared at it for a long moment, then whispered to herself, "Power without foundation always cracks." Her phone buzzed once more. Janine again. "Just sent the copyright notice. Effective immediately." Clarice smiled. The first domino was about to fall. The Langley name still glittered in Savannah, at least on paper. But after the licensing scandal, the glow had dimmed. Skylar's silence online was telling. Trent's temper, legendary. And in the midst of the chaos, Aubrey Langley decided to prove she could salvage the family image all by herself. Her Heritage Hearts fundraiser promised refinement, redemption, and rebranding. Everything Clarice had once done effortlessly. The guest list was stacked with Savannah's elite. Old money, new influencers, and the kind of donors who treated charity like theater. Clarice hadn't been invited, of course. She went anyway. The ballroom shimmered under chandeliers that mimicked candlelight, every table dressed in blush and gold. Clarice arrived an hour late, long enough to ensure her entrance meant something. Heads turned as she walked in, wearing black satin and quiet confidence. Whispers rippled. "Is that Clarice Langley? Did you hear what she did to Trent? God, she looks incredible." Aubrey spotted her across the room, her smile tightening like a drawstring. "Well," she said to a cluster of guests, "some people just can't move on." Clarice moved through the crowd without acknowledging her, accepting a champagne flute from a passing tray, nodding to familiar faces who suddenly remembered they'd always admired her work. At the far side of the room stood the silent auction table, an art collector's buffet of nostalgia and vanity. But one item froze her mid-step, a framed oil portrait soft and luminous, Trent's mother. But Clarice recognized something else beneath the layers of paint, the faint outline of her own pose, her own features softened and reimagined. She'd sat for that piece decades ago, before Trent's mother passed. The artist had used her as a reference, then repainted the image for the Langley estate. Clarice had forgotten it existed. Now it hung here, labeled Portrait of Eleanor Langley, donated by Aubrey Langley. Estimated value, $25,000. Clarice's eyes narrowed. She picked up the bidding pen, wrote Clarice Langley, and added a single figure, $25,000. Then she walked away. The auction ended with fanfare. Aubrey took the stage in a sequined dress, voice smooth but strained. "Thank you all for supporting Heritage Hearts. Tonight's auction was a tremendous success." Applause. Clinking glasses. A host whispered into her ear, then handed her the final bid sheet. Aubrey scanned it, her smile faltering. "Our top item," she said, "the portrait of Eleanor Langley, goes to Clarice Langley." The crowd murmured. Cameras flashed. Clarice rose slowly, crossing the ballroom with the grace of a queen reclaiming her crown. She accepted the framed painting from the auction assistant, her eyes never leaving Aubrey's. Aubrey forced a laugh. "Still obsessed with your ex, are we?" Clarice adjusted the frame in her hands, inspecting it as though evaluating an antique. "No," she said, voice smooth as glass. "I just know value when I see it." A ripple of laughter broke from the crowd, not cruel, but admiring. For the first time in years, the room tilted toward her, not away. Aubrey's face burned crimson. She turned sharply, dismissing the moment with brittle applause. But the damage was done. The whispers carried faster than champagne could pour. She outbid Aubrey at her own event. Clarice owns that portrait now. Didn't Trent's mother adore her? Clarice left before dessert. Later that night, she placed the portrait on her dining table, the same one she'd once shared with the family, now pretending she never existed. Janine arrived, windblown and grinning, a bottle of Merlot in hand. "You didn't tell me you were going to buy back their ghosts," she said, setting the wine down. Clarice traced the painting's edge. "It wasn't about the portrait," she murmured. "It was about reminding her I'm not a ghost." Janine poured 2 glasses. "The city's already buzzing. You just became the story again." Clarice lifted her glass. "No, Janine. I never stopped being the story. They just forgot who wrote it." They clinked glasses. The wine tasted like quiet victory. Across the room, the portrait caught the lamplight, her own faint silhouette still visible beneath the painted matriarch. 2 women layered, one ghost reclaiming form. Her phone buzzed. A message from Miles. "Tomorrow's piece is titled Inheritance. You'll like it." Clarice smiled to herself, gaze fixed on the painting. It started quietly, just a photograph. Miles had uploaded it to Savannah Modern without fanfare. Clarice standing in her studio, surrounded by sketches and mood boards, a beam of morning light cutting across her face. The caption read, "The ghost hand behind Savannah's aesthetic finally steps into the frame." By noon, the article had gone viral in the design community. By evening, it had crossed into lifestyle media. Architectural Digest South, Coastal Living, even a New York blog quoted her long-forgotten design principles. Her follower count tripled overnight. By the next morning, it had doubled again. Clarice scrolled through the notifications with detached amusement. She'd never cared for social media. Too loud, too fleeting. But the sudden wave of attention was strategic gold. Her name was trending again, and not as Trent's ex-wife, but as Clarice Langley, designer. Janine dropped by mid-morning, holding a pastry bag and her phone. "You're officially an influencer now," she teased. "Half the city wants your palette recommendations, the other half wants to intern for you." Clarice smirked. "Influence isn't about followers, it's about focus." Janine slid into a chair, scrolling through headlines. "You've redefined nostalgia, apparently. And you've humiliated Skylar without even speaking her name." Clarice took a sip of coffee. "Skylar doesn't need my help to humiliate herself." She wasn't wrong. Across town, Skylar had spent the day filming promos for her Langley home line, mock-ups of pastel kitchens, rustic meets glam furniture, and mood boards recycled from Clarice's early portfolios. But when the contracts hit the manufacturers, the response came back unanimous: declined. Licensing unavailable. Skylar didn't know yet that the manufacturers were owned by subsidiaries of a holding company Janine had quietly structured years ago, and at the top of that structure, unlisted but decisive, was Clarice. When the third rejection email arrived, Skylar's team scrambled for new vendors. But Savannah is a small city with a long memory. Every call circled back to Clarice's influence. Janine called that night, voice edged with delight. "She's learning what it means to operate without foundation." Clarice smiled faintly, watching the city lights flicker beyond her window. "Sometimes," she murmured, "the frame sells more than the canvas." 2 days later, Trent tried to buy back his footing, literally. A realtor contacted Janine with an urgent inquiry. Trent Langley was seeking to repurchase one of the small commercial properties Clarice's trust had absorbed in the divorce shuffle. Janine met him in her office, the old marble echoing with his impatience. "This is personal, Janine," he said, pacing. "That building's tied to our family name." She kept her expression neutral. "Legally, it's tied to Clarice's." Trent bristled. "Name your price." Janine leaned back. "It's not for sale." He glared. "Everything's for sale." Janine smiled. "Not to you." When she left him alone in the boardroom, she texted Clarice 2 words. He tried. Blocked. Clarice replied, "He always does," until the wall hits back. That evening, she walked through her studio, the hum of quiet success filling the air. Fabric samples, color palettes, and old architectural renderings lined the walls, memories she had once tucked away, now reborn in new light. Her phone buzzed with emails, brand collaborations, podcast invites, an offer for a national home decor campaign. She read them, one by one, with the detached satisfaction of someone who had already envisioned the endgame. Then a new message appeared, from a name she hadn't seen before. Emma Langley. Subject: "I want to know your side." Clarice hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen. The last time she'd seen Emma, Trent's niece, bright-eyed and young, had been years ago, back when Clarice was still the unacknowledged matriarch of the Langley circle. Emma had always asked questions no one else dared. The email continued, "I grew up believing you walked away from everything, but after reading the exposé, I think maybe everything walked away from you. Can we talk?" Clarice read it twice. Something in her chest stirred, something that wasn't victory, but recognition. She typed a simple reply. "Tomorrow, noon, Booker Studio." She hit send and closed her laptop. Outside, thunder rolled again, soft and promising. Savannah glowed in the distance, a city painted by her past and finally, ready to acknowledge its true artist. The warehouse sat on the far edge of the city, past the ivy-choked train yards and fading murals that had once been Clarice's early playground. From the outside, it looked like nothing. Just another industrial shell, forgotten by Savannah's constant hunger for beauty. Inside, though, it breathed history. Dust caught the morning light in soft halos, falling across stacks of rolled blueprints. Covered furniture frames, and rows of design samples meticulously labeled in Clarice's hand. The air smelled of varnish, paper, and time, her 3 most enduring materials. Emma Langley stood at the threshold, hesitant but wide-eyed. "You've kept all this?" Clarice's heels clicked softly against the concrete as she walked ahead, unhurried. "Kept it?" "No. Preserved it. Everything worth remembering needs protection from the people who want to rewrite it." She pulled the cord of a hanging lamp. A warm glow spread across the nearest drafting table, revealing the first layer of the secret she'd been building for years. Blueprints, hundreds of them, each one signed C.H. Langley, the initials most people assumed were Trent's. Emma moved closer, tracing the pencil lines with reverence. "These are all yours?" Clarice smiled faintly. "Every line. Every proportion, every piece of symmetry he ever called his own began here." She guided Emma deeper into the space. They passed sketches of Langley's earliest furniture collections, the award-winning chaise that appeared in Architectural Digest under his name, the gallery lobby that became Savannah's most photographed backdrop. All of them bore her handwriting in the margins. "Curve here, reduce depth by 2 inches. Light should hit north wall by 4 p.m. Emma's breath caught as realization took hold. "He said you didn't do much," she whispered. "Just picked fabrics, arranged flowers." Clarice paused, looking at the stack of framed design boards leaning against the far wall. Her expression didn't harden, it clarified. I was busy, she said quietly, making everything he takes credit for. The words hung in the still air like a verdict. Emma blinked rapidly, tears forming but unfallen. You could have told everyone. I tried once, Clarice said, voice even. He told me it would ruin the brand. He said the myth of a man sells better than the truth of a woman. She turned toward a covered installation in the center of the warehouse, a structure shrouded in dust cloths and rope. Clarice tugged the fabric free. Beneath it stood the original Langley Studio sign, its gold leaf faintly tarnished but still elegant. The difference was in the inscription: Langley Design, founded by Trent and Clarice Hart Langley, 1993. Emma inhaled sharply. He removed your name from everything. Clarice folded the cloth neatly, her movements controlled, ritualistic. That was the point. Erase me in public, depend on me in private. It's a design philosophy he never quite grew out of. Miles arrived just as they finished walking the perimeter. He whistled low when he saw the stacks. Good Lord, Clarice, this is a cathedral. Clarice gestured around them. A mausoleum, until now. Emma turned to him, face bright with urgency. People need to see this. Miles exchanged a look with Clarice. Are you sure? For a long moment she didn't answer. She ran her fingers along the edge of one old design, the first kitchen she ever drew, the one Trent had said was too modern for the Southern client. Finally she nodded. It's time. They buried me in my own work. Let's exhume it properly. Miles smiled, already pulling out his phone. Give me 24 hours. The upload began that evening. Miles's studio team cataloged each piece, photographing every sketch, every blueprint, every furniture tag bearing her initials. The files went live at midnight, the Claris archive, a legacy reframed. By morning, the design world had erupted. The Savannah Herald, the true woman behind Langley Design. Architectural Digest. For decades, a visionary worked in the shadows. Now her light fills the room. National Gallery. Weekly. The hidden genius of Clarice Langley. Comments poured in. Shock, outrage, admiration. Museums called. Collectors offered acquisitions. The myth of Trent Langley cracked under the weight of proof, and Clarice's name, her real name, rose through the debris. At dawn, she returned to the warehouse alone. The city outside was buzzing with her resurrection, but she stood quietly amid the stacks, her reflection caught in the glass of a framed design. Her phone buzzed. Miles again. It's everywhere. Congratulations, Clarice. Then another message followed, this one from an unknown number. You've made your point, but you won't like what comes next. Clarice stared at the words, her pulse calm but her instincts sharpening. She looked up at the walls lined with her life's work, beautiful, fragile, permanent, and whispered, then let's see if they can still build without a foundation. The invitation arrived on heavy cardstock, ivory with embossed lettering, the kind of paper that still carried the scent of ceremony. Savannah Design Council presents Women Who Shape the South. Clarice had to smile at that. 10 years ago, the same council had quietly forgotten to invite her to its annual gala. Now they wanted her on stage. Janine noticed the expression when she found her that morning, seated by the window with coffee and calm. You're going to do it, she said without question. Clarice didn't look up. Public speaking isn't my favorite sport. It's not sport, Janine replied, setting her briefcase down. It's strategy. You just rewrote Savannah's design history, Clarice. This isn't a stage. They built you a pulpit. Clarice chuckled softly, folding the invitation closed. Then I suppose I should make the sermon worth it. The afternoon of the event was unseasonably warm, the kind of southern heat that seemed to hum beneath the marble of the city hall steps. Inside, the ballroom gleamed. High ceilings, gold trim, a wall of cameras. Miles was there, of course, leaning against a column in a sharp black suit, a quiet smile on his face. Savannah royalty, restored to the throne, he murmured when Clarice passed him. Thrones are for people who need elevation, she replied. I prefer footing. He grinned. You're trending again. Want to know what they're calling you this week? Not particularly. The comeback blueprint. That almost made her laugh. Almost? Backstage, Janine fussed with her blazer and pearls like a general preparing a commander for battle. Keep it short, sharp, and emotional. You've already won the intellectual war. Now they need to feel it. Clarice nodded. You've been my best lawyer, Janine. But tonight, I'm defending something bigger than myself. And what's that? The truth that design is never decoration. It's definition. Janine paused. That's your line. Say it. Clarice smiled. I plan to. When her name was announced, the applause came like a tide. Steady, surprised, reverent. Clarice walked to the podium in black silk, posture perfect, expression measured. She waited for the room to still before she spoke. Design isn't decoration, she began. It's definition. It's the way we shape space to match the version of ourselves we hope to live inside. The audience leaned forward. Her voice was calm, melodic, threaded with conviction. For years, I worked in rooms that taught me silence was part of the aesthetic. I believed them. I thought my job was to make beauty speak softly enough that it didn't threaten the men beside it. But beauty doesn't serve silence. It exposes it. It shows where truth has been edited. A hush fell. The moment hung suspended, the air dense with revelation. So, she continued, to every young designer here who's been told her work is too bold, too sentimental, too much, remember this. They only say that when the room starts to feel like yours. The crowd erupted. Applause thundered across the marble. Flashbulbs sparked. Even the council members who once ignored her stood, clapping too loudly, too late. Clarice stepped back from the microphone, nodding once in quiet acknowledgement before walking off stage. Within the hour, her quotes flooded social media. Journalists called it the moment Savannah rediscovered its voice. Miles uploaded a short clip, her final line glowing over slow pans of her designs. Skylar posted a subtweet 20 minutes later. Some people think class comes with age. I think it leaves with bitterness. Stay gracious. It backfired immediately. The replies came fast and sharp. You mean like stealing another woman's designs? You're trending for the wrong reasons again. Skylar. Clarice Langley for president. Janine sent Clarice the thread. Ratioed in under 10 minutes, she texted. A new city record. Clarice's reply was simple. Gravity always wins eventually. The next morning, Miles arrived at her studio with a wrapped box the size of a painting. Consider this our encore, he said, eyes gleaming. She lifted the lid. Inside lay a catalog, thick, elegant, embossed in gold, the Clarice collection. Every design inspired by your originals, he said, modernized, reinterpreted, and completely credited. We launch next week. Clarice ran her hand over the cover. You didn't have to name it after me. I did, Miles said, because you named everything else first. He wasn't exaggerating. Within a week, the line exploded. Sales, reviews, press. Stores sold out of the first run in hours. Clarice's name, once whispered in past tense, was now printed in bold serif on every billboard from River Street to Broughton. And Trent, for once, had nothing left to say. That evening, Clarice stood at her window, the city lights mirrored in the wine glass she held. The reflection in the glass looked like a crown, though she'd never admit it. Her phone vibrated. An email from the city council. We'd like to propose a permanent installation in your honor. A public space. A Clarice Langley room. She smiled faintly, closing the message. They built the stage, she whispered, setting the glass down. All I had to do was walk onto it. The estate came back on the market quietly. No fanfare, no open house, just a discreet listing sent to qualified buyers. Clarice saw it the moment Janine forwarded the notice. Langley Manor, historic renovation by Trent Langley, featured in Southern Heritage. The irony was almost decadent. Clarice read through the glossy PDF, taking in the marble staircase she'd designed, the garden layout she'd drawn by hand, the parlor Schuyler had redecorated in what Southern Heritage had called new money coastal. Every inch of it was built on her drafts, her sensibility, her ghost. Now it was available, because Trent couldn't afford to keep up with its maintenance. Do it, she told Janine. Make the offer. Janine blinked. You sure you want that house? Clarice's smile was cool. I want the headline. A month later, the papers read exactly as she'd envisioned. Clarice Langley purchases former Langley estate. Plans public design initiative. Savannah went breathless. Reporters called it poetic justice. Socialites called it madness. Clarice called it Tuesday. She arrived at the estate with the keys and a purpose. No champagne, no nostalgia, no ghost chasing. Just quiet footsteps through familiar rooms, each echo a reminder of how absence can claim space until someone stronger reclaims it. In the grand foyer, sunlight poured across the marble she'd once fought to preserve. She stood there a long time, then turned to Janine. I'm not keeping it as a museum, Clarice said. I want it alive. Janine frowned. Alive how? As a lab. A community design space for women who never got their seat at the table. Within weeks, contractors moved in, not to restore, but to repurpose. The ballroom became a collaborative studio, the dining room a prototype workshop. Clarice's old office, still echoing with her past life, became a mentorship center. When the press came for the ribbon cutting, she didn't hire a PR firm. She let the young designers speak instead. Their words carried everything she didn't need to say. A local reporter asked her, "Why here, Ms. Langley?" Clarice looked up at the facade, its columns still proud, its windows gleaming again. "Because power has a memory," she said, "and sometimes you have to reintroduce it to the right owner." That line made the evening news, of course. By the next morning, her face was on every Savannah lifestyle feed. Aubrey posted a bitter caption beneath a filtered photo of the estate. Some people can't let go of what isn't theirs. Sad, really. The comments didn't side with her. Not anymore. A week later, Janine arrived with a package, a polished brass plaque wrapped in velvet. "You're going to like this," she said, handing it over. Clarice unwrapped it and read aloud, smiling as the engraving caught the light. Built by Langley. Reclaimed by Clarice. Subtle, she said. Not my strong suit, Janine replied. Shall we install it? They did. Right by the entrance gate where every tour and magazine photographer would capture it forever. The backlash came fast, of course. Schuyler filed a defamation claim, alleging emotional and reputational distress. The court clerk dismissed it in under 24 hours. Clarice read the notice over coffee. 24 hours, she murmured. She's improving. It used to take her weeks to quit. Janine grinned. Don't get sentimental now. I wouldn't dream of it. By autumn, Savannah Living published a full spread on the new Clarice Langley Design Lab, its mission, its students, its success. The city's cultural committee nominated her for the Civic Legacy Award, the same honor Trent had lobbied for years ago and never received. She didn't celebrate. She worked. She mentored. She filled the house with voices that had never been allowed to echo in such rooms before. One evening, while reviewing blueprints at the old dining table, Clarice looked out the window and caught sight of the new brass plaque glinting in the lamplight. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel something close to peace, not triumph, not revenge. Something quieter. Vindication. She poured herself a small glass of bourbon, the way Trent used to, only this time, the bottle and the house were both hers. Her phone buzzed. A message from Miles. "You might want to step outside. The press just arrived early. They're calling it the house that laughed back." Clarice smiled, walking toward the door, her heels echoing through the reclaimed halls. The camera lights hit the marble just right. Soft, forgiving, golden. Clarice stood in the center of what had once been Trent's proudest showcase property, now a studio redesigned for something else entirely. 3, 2, 1, the director said from behind the lens. Clarice turned to the camera, calm as ever, hands resting lightly on the edge of a restored oak table. "Welcome," she said, her voice measured, smooth, unmistakably in control. This is Framed by Clarice, a show about how spaces tell stories and how to reclaim yours. No cue cards, no rehearsed charm, just presence. Behind the camera, Miles watched with quiet satisfaction. The production had been his idea, but the tone, the poise, the power, that was all her. The first episode focused on design restoration through memory. Every location chosen was one she'd once been cut out of. Properties that bore the fingerprints of her erased past. Now she was walking the audience through them as their rightful architect. Each frame looked immaculate. Each line of narration was a reclamation. When the director called cut, the crew erupted into light applause. Clarice smiled faintly, removing her mic. "We'll keep the next segment simple," she said. "The story doesn't need embellishment. It already happened." By the time Framed by Clarice aired its teaser, the internet did what it always did: divided, dissected, and decided. The trailer trended for days. Critics called her the poised architect of her own renaissance. Fans flooded her feed with praise. But for Skylar, the timing was ruinous. Her influencer brand, already teetering from lost contracts and public mockery, began to crumble. Sponsors withdrew. Collaborations paused indefinitely. One by one, the pastel-colored partnerships vanished. Clarice didn't celebrate it. She simply noted the inevitable symmetry. Skylar had built her career pretending to live in rooms Clarice designed. Eventually, people always recognize the original. Aubrey tried to salvage dignity by pivoting into the art world again. Rumors spread of her planning a new gallery. Something fresh, southern, youthful. The irony was too rich. The only viable space in her desired district happened to be managed by Langley Properties LLC, one of Clarice's holdings. The offer came through her assistant, polite and formal. Reduced rent, premier location, full freedom. Aubrey declined within the hour. "Out of principle," she told a reporter. "Some places just don't align with my brand." Clarice saw the quote the next morning in the Savannah Register. She circled it with a pen, half amused. "Pride," she said to Janine, who was sitting across from her, "is the most expensive lease in Savannah." Janine smiled. "And the one you don't have to collect." Meanwhile, Emma had found her way to Miles's studio, as Clarice had quietly arranged. The young woman thrived there, sharp, curious, instinctively talented. One afternoon, Clarice stopped by unannounced. Emma was sketching a furniture piece, something clean and clever, the kind of design that balanced modern function with emotional recall. "You've learned fast," Clarice said. Emma turned, startled, then smiled. "Miles says I think like you." Clarice walked over, studying the sketch. "Then you're thinking like someone who builds with intention. Don't lose that." Emma hesitated. "You really think I could do what you do?" Clarice looked at her steadily. No, she said softly. You'll do what you do. And that's better. Emma's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. Across the city, Trent Langley's empire had begun its quiet dismantling. One by one, properties listed under Langley Design Holdings were being sold off, some to anonymous buyers, others to shell companies that, if traced, led right back to Clarice. He did it quietly, almost invisibly, like a man trying to fade before the world realized he'd lost everything he once used to define himself. Clarice never gloated. She simply watched, detached, from her studio window as the financial pages documented what everyone already suspected. Langley Design was collapsing. When a reporter called for comment, Clarice declined. I prefer to speak through my work, she said simply. That night, she returned to her estate, the design lab alive with students sketching late into the evening. Laughter echoed through the halls, the kind that once carried tension, now replaced by possibility. She paused at the door of the old parlor, her new office, where a camera crew had set up for her next shoot. On the monitor, she caught her reflection framed in perfect light, surrounded by the very architecture that had once symbolized her exile. The title card flashed on the screen mock-up, framed by Clarice, Episode 2, The Room I Now Own. She smiled faintly, taking in the words, the symmetry, the justice. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Janine. Trent's selling his last property, the headquarters. You'll want to see the buyer's name. Clarice opened the attached document. Purchaser. Booker Holdings, LLC. Miles. She set the phone down, pulse steady, mind already tracing the next move. Outside, thunder rolled again, low and deliberate, as if the city itself were applauding. The knock came just after sunrise, 3 soft raps against the oak door, hesitant but familiar. Clarice, already awake and dressed, paused her morning ritual of coffee and correspondence. She knew that rhythm. It carried the ghost of a man who once walked through her life as if he owned it. When she opened the door, Trent Langley stood there. He was smaller than she remembered. Not in height, but in gravity. His posture slouched where arrogance used to live. The tailored suits had been replaced with something modest, the lines around his eyes deeper, his confidence stripped to the bone. Clarice, he said softly, voice frayed at the edges. You look well. She stepped aside without a word. The invitation was neither warm nor cold, just efficient. He entered the parlor, now her office, pausing under the high ceilings he'd once called too feminine. The brass plaque outside, built by Langley, reclaimed by Clarice, still gleamed in the morning light. He looked around, swallowing hard. This place. It's different. It's alive, Clarice replied. It was dead when you had it. That landed. He didn't argue. Instead, he sat down, hands trembling slightly as he folded and unfolded his hat. I've been watching, he said. The show, the galleries, the lab. I didn't think you'd actually pull it all off. Clarice smiled faintly. You never did. He nodded, exhaling through what might have been shame. We were arrogant. I was cruel. You didn't deserve that. For a long moment, Clarice said nothing. The silence was deliberate, controlled. He had filled too many rooms with his voice. This one would breathe her quiet instead. When she finally spoke, her tone was calm, even. Cruelty was your design language, Trent. You built your world around it. I just learned how to reframe it. He looked up at her then, eyes tired, glassy. You've made your point. Not quite. He sighed. I came to ask about one last thing. The Whitaker building. His throat caught. I'd like to buy it back. For closure, I suppose. I can't stand driving past it every day knowing it's yours. Clarice leaned back in her chair, studying him as if evaluating an antique for authenticity. For closure, she repeated quietly. How poetic. I'm not trying to start anything, he said quickly. I'm just tired. You won, Clarice. Let me buy it back. Name your price. Clarice rose, crossed to a cabinet, and pulled out a single folder. She placed it on the table between them. The front read, Whitaker Lease Agreement. Trent reached for it, hesitating. What's this? The paperwork, she said, her voice a slow, steady drawl. You should look at page 2. He flipped it open, eyes scanning until they froze. There, bold and irrefutable, was his own signature, dated and notarized, beneath a clause he clearly hadn't read when he'd signed the original redevelopment deal years ago. He blinked. This can't be right. Clarice folded her arms. You already bought it back, Trent. You've been paying for it every month. The rent increase you fought? That wasn't arbitrary. That was ownership in reverse. His mouth opened, then closed again. The truth worked its way through him like slow poison. You mean? She nodded. You've been paying me to keep the building you thought you owned. He slumped back, silent. The fight was gone. Only the hollow awareness remained. Clarice's tone softened, though not out of pity. You always rushed through the fine print. You treated details like decor, something pretty to ignore. Turns out they were the foundation. Trent rubbed his temples, eyes shining with something dangerously close to regret. All this time? Yes, she said simply. All this time. He stood unsteadily, reaching for the folder as if it might anchor him. I don't even know what I came here for anymore. Clarice watched him walk toward the door, each step echoing through the space he'd once called his masterpiece. Just before he left, he turned back to her. You really did win, didn't you? Clarice smiled, not cruelly, not triumphantly, but with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who finally owned her silence. I didn't win, Trent. I just stopped losing. He lingered for a moment longer, then left without another word. Outside, the autumn wind picked up, rustling the oak leaves across the estate's long driveway. Through the window, Clarice watched his car disappear around the bend, smaller and smaller, until it vanished completely. Janine entered a few moments later holding her phone. You're not going to believe this, she said. The city just updated the property tax registry. Whitaker's officially listed under your trust name. Public record now. Clarice's gaze stayed on the horizon. Good, she murmured. Let Savannah read the fine print too. Her reflection glinted in the glass. Strong, serene, untouchable. The winter light over Savannah was pale and forgiving, the kind that softens even the sharpest edges. Clarice sat at her drafting table in the converted ballroom, a mug of coffee cooling beside her, the hum of students working in nearby rooms drifting through the halls. The house no longer echoed. It breathed. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her sketches. Emma stepped inside, hesitant but glowing with purpose. In her hands she carried something flat, wrapped carefully in brown paper and tied with a satin ribbon. For you, she said, voice trembling just enough to betray how much it mattered. Clarice set down her pencil. You didn't have to. Emma shook her head. I did. She placed the package on the table. Clarice untied the ribbon and peeled back the paper. Inside was a framed drawing, yellowed at the edges, pencil lines faint but familiar. It was the first layout Clarice had ever designed. A small Savannah townhouse kitchen, open concept, her original signature still scrawled in the corner. I found it in the archive, Emma said softly. You wrote notes in the margin. Design is where memory lives. Clarice's throat tightened. I remember this one. Trent said it wasn't practical. He hated the skylight. Emma smiled gently. He built it anyway. He just told everyone it was his idea. Clarice let out a quiet laugh, the sound equal parts irony and peace. He always did love my impracticalities. She stood, hanging the frame on the wall above her drafting table, perfectly centered. You have good instincts, Emma, for design and for truth. Emma looked down, eyes glistening. I just wanted you to know that the next generation, we know whose hands actually built this city. Clarice touched her shoulder briefly, a rare gesture of affection. Then I did my job. Later that week, Miles hosted a gala at the Savannah Museum of Art, an evening that blurred the lines between celebration and vindication. The banners read, "The Clarice Langley Fund, Mentorship for Women in Design." Clarice stood beneath the archway as guests arrived, the sound of laughter and live jazz weaving through the hall. The fund had been Miles's idea, a permanent endowment to support women who wanted to build, create, and own without apology. Savannah owes you this, Miles said, joining her by the champagne table. You didn't just design spaces, you redesigned what success looks like here. Clarice smiled faintly. I just corrected the lines they drew too narrow. He lifted his glass. Too wide margins. They clinked their glasses, and the crowd applauded as the museum lights dimmed, the stage glowing in warm amber tones. Janine took the podium first. She looked uncharacteristically emotional, her usual steel softened. I've spent my career fighting for other people's legacies, she began, but Clarice Langley taught me what it means to protect your own. She turned toward Clarice in the front row. You didn't just frame them, Clarice. You reframed yourself. And in doing so, you reframed us all. Applause swelled, genuine and thunderous. Clarice stood briefly, offering a small nod. She wasn't one for tears, but her chest felt full, like breath returning after years of holding it. At the end of the evening, a museum curator unveiled a new announcement, the Eleanor Hart Scholarship, named for Clarice's late mother, to fund education for young women in architecture and design. The room went still. Clarice turned toward Janine, eyes wide. You didn't. I did, Janine said. It was time someone honored the woman who raised one hell of a designer. Clarice's lips trembled with a rare, quiet smile. She would have hated all this fuss. Janine winked. She'd have loved being the headline. Outside, the Savannah air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of magnolia and sea salt. The city felt smaller now, not diminished, but contained, as if the chaos that once owned her had finally been measured and scaled to fit her design. Across the skyline, the new Clarice Langley Design Lab sign gleamed softly under the streetlights. Skylar's social accounts had gone dark weeks ago, her influencer empire gone silent. Aubrey had moved to Atlanta. Whispers said she'd joined a PR firm, desperate for a fresh start where her last name didn't echo every conversation. Clarice neither gloated nor grieved. Empires, she knew, collapsed not with explosions, but with quiet absence. As she drove back to her estate, the framed drawing Emma had gifted her sat beside her in the passenger seat. The headlights washed over the brass plaque at the gates, built by Langley, reclaimed by Clarice. She parked, stepping out beneath the halo of porch light. From inside, she could hear the sound of her students laughing, young voices designing futures she no longer needed to control. For the first time in decades, Clarice felt the weight of legacy without the ache of loss. Then her phone buzzed. A message from the Savannah Heritage Commission. Ms. Langley, the city has approved the street renaming proposal. You'll want to see this tomorrow? Clarice exhaled slowly, the beginnings of a smile touching her lips. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall, arched windows of Clarice's office, warm and deliberate. The air carried the faint scent of paint and cedar, fresh beginnings disguised as routine. On the wall behind her desk hung a single, newly unveiled painting. It wasn't one of her commissioned works, nor a gallery favorite. It was abstract, a frame without a picture, layered with gold and muted grays. its negative space rich with intention. Clarice adjusted it slightly, ensuring it caught the light just so. It didn't need an image inside. The shape, the act of framing itself, was the art. Janine entered quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. "It's finished then?" Clarice turned, smiling. "It's unfinished. That's the point." Janine studied it for a moment, nodding with quiet admiration. "You've made peace with the empty space." Clarice took her coffee, eyes still on the painting. "I didn't make peace with it. I designed it." That afternoon, she walked the long corridor of the Clarice Langley exhibit, a new installation at the Savannah Museum of Design. Each room represented a phase of her life. The foundation room, sketches from her early career, blueprints from the Whitaker Building, the smell of ink and vellum. The erasure room, minimalist, white walls, faint outlines of projects credited to others. The absent spoke louder than any text. The reclamation room, photographs framed by Clarice, the brass plaque from the Langley estate, her mother's scholarship letter framed beneath glass. Guests moved through the exhibit in hushed awe, guided by sound installations, her recorded voice explaining proportion, balance, and legacy. But in the final room, she walked alone. It was dim, lit only by skylight. The centerpiece, an empty gilded frame suspended midair. Beneath it, an inscription carved into stone read, "Legacy isn't ownership, it's authorship." Clarice stood still for a long time, the quiet around her neither lonely nor heavy. It was complete. Later, back at the design lab, Emma set up her recording equipment. "We'll start whenever you're ready," she said. Clarice sat near the window, sunlight tracing the silver in her hair. The microphone waited between them, its red light steady. Emma asked, "How do you want people to remember your story?" Clarice considered the question carefully. "As a blueprint, not a biography," she said finally. "Stories fade, structures remain." Emma smiled. "And if they ask what it cost?" Clarice's gaze drifted to the framed drawing Emma had given her, the one from her very first design. Everything worth keeping costs something. The interview stretched for hours, stories of early projects, betrayals, recoveries. Clarice spoke like an architect laying a final cornerstone. When Emma asked her last question, Clarice leaned forward, voice low and certain. "I wasn't erased," she said. "I was reintroduced." Emma turned off the recorder, eyes shining. "That's the closing line." Clarice smiled faintly. "No," she said. "That's just the truth." The next morning, the city gathered downtown. Workers stood beneath the street sign at the corner of Whitaker and East Gaston. The old sign, Langley Avenue, lay at their feet, scuffed and worn. The new one gleamed as it was bolted into place, Clarice Street. The crowd applauded, phones lifted to capture history in real time. Janine squeezed Clarice's hand. "I told you they'd come around." Clarice's eyes stayed fixed on the sign. "They didn't come around," she said quietly. "They just learned the right angle to look from." That evening, as dusk bled gold over Savannah, Clarice walked alone past the old Langley headquarters. The building's marble facade reflected the setting sun, its shadow long and familiar. She paused at the gate. The Langley design letters had been removed months ago, leaving faint outlines in the stone. Beneath them, newly etched, gleamed 4 quiet words: "Owned by C.H. Langley Trust." The reflection of her face shimmered faintly in the glass door, older now, unflinching. Behind that door lived everything they'd once taken, every room they'd tried to fill without her. She rested her palm against the cool glass. The city hummed softly around her, the city she had designed, rebuilt, reframed. "They wanted me out of the picture," she whispered. "So I became the frame around everything they own, Clarice turned, her silhouette dissolving into the glow of the streetlights. The camera of her show, waiting nearby, caught the moment. A woman walking away from her own history, framed perfectly by the world she'd built. Fade out,